This is lecture number DR005, GS05. This is the fifth of the Mega Genius lectures and the fifth lecture of the Genius Formula series. It was recorded on November 15th, 2000. The title of this lecture is Life's Road Signs. It is 25 minutes long. Copyright 2000 by Mega Genius. All rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not, in whole or in part, be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
Now let's look at both the Genius Formula and intelligence a bit more closely. The Genius Formula can be used to completely understand anything. If your intelligence was virtually infinite, you would be capable of an ultimate analysis, and you would fully understand whatever you chose to understand by means of a perfect application of the Genius Formula. A perfect application of the Genius Formula always results in complete understanding. It's not necessary for you to understand the mathematical formula for that either, but for the few who are interested, here it is. Perfect application of the Genius Formula equals PD, which equals parenthesis x sub 1 plus x sub 2 plus x sub 3 close parenthesis d, where P and parenthesis x sub 1 plus x sub 2 plus x sub 3 close parenthesis each represents complete perception. X sub 1 is infinite scope of attention, x sub 2 is thorough examination, x sub 3 is total exclusion of assumptions, and D is total differentiation. Those individuals who have applied the Genius Formula perfectly as their normal procedure of reasoning have been extremely few indeed. I've only known one other such individual. He was an intimate friend who no longer inhabits a body on this planet. Such individuals are so rare that no name exists for them. That's to be expected, though. Intelligence is the ability to differentiate, and man distinguishes and identifies people of lower intelligence considerably more easily and effectively than he does people of higher intelligence. For example, those of below average intelligence in descending order might be classified as morons, imbeciles, and idiots. But how many classifications can you think of for the very intellectually gifted? Obviously, they also have different degrees of intelligence. Just a few IQ points in one direction or the other can reflect an important difference. For instance, how many IQ points do you have to spare? Suddenly they become significant. The fact that you are listening to these Mega Genius lectures indicates that your intelligence is probably above average. Furthermore, you did not stop listening to the lectures when I gave you the mathematical formulas, whether you understood them or not. To make my point, though, let's imagine that your IQ is the theoretical average of 100. If we then subtracted 5 points, your friends might or might not notice the difference, depending on their intelligence. But you would. You wouldn't feel as mentally sharp. If we lowered it 5 more points, your friends would ask if you had been getting enough sleep lately. 5 points below that, and you would have concerned company arriving for an indefinite stay. On the other hand, if we magically added 5 points, you would notice that difference too, and the next 5, and the next 5. Surprisingly, however, I sincerely doubt that any of your friends would. Why? Because, as I said, intelligence is the ability to differentiate, and man distinguishes and identifies people of lower intelligence far better than he does people of higher intelligence. For example, you will almost immediately recognize a stranger along the street who has an IQ of 80, which is 20 points below average, as mentally deficient. But you will never recognize another stranger who has an IQ of even 140, which is 40 points above average, as a genius. unless your IQ is about 140 also. Interesting, isn't it? It really isn't that the fellow with the IQ of 80 shows it and the genius doesn't. It's just that you don't recognize the plentiful signs of intelligence that the genius displays. For instance, just walking down the street, would you have trouble telling the difference between many people of some other particular race? Or between a person who is gay and one who is straight? Or between an honest person and a crook? Well, a person of that race, or one who is gay, or a crook, should have no difficulty whatsoever. Why? Because he has probably taken the time and put forth the energy to learn to differentiate at least fairly well on that particular subject. The signs are there, and he has developed the ability to recognize and understand them. You could say that he has learned to expand his intelligence in that specific area. So, people notice IQs lower than their own fairly easily, but they are extremely inaccurate in estimating the IQs of persons who are more intelligent than themselves. They understand lower intelligence. Higher intelligence, however, is above their understanding. If you want to be understood, just chug-a-lug a fifth of rum, or do anything else that will temporarily knock 50 points off your IQ, and even the dog will relate with you fabulously. Add 50 points to your IQ, though, and you will quickly realize that unless you communicate at, or only slightly above, the level of intelligence of another, you will be playing to an empty house every day of the year. I am certain, for example, that dogs do not realize we are appreciably more intelligent than they are. Rather, I'm sure they merely see us as similarly intelligent creatures with bizarre overtones for which they forgive us. If you could have had lunch with Leonardo da Vinci, Wolfgang Mozart, Albert Einstein, and Thomas Edison, with no knowledge of who they were, or of their creations and discoveries, do you think you would have recognized any one of them as a genius? Unless you are a genius, I sincerely doubt that you would have. The odds are extremely high that you, too, would have identified each of them as merely bizarre. Now let's look further at the IQ scale, which we use to confirm morons, imbeciles, and idiots. What word would most accurately describe a person with an IQ of 132, or 137, or 142, or even 147? We use one word to encompass everyone whose intelligence falls within the entire range from about 132 to infinity. Genius. See, we really don't differentiate well between people of higher intelligence, do we? Nevertheless, as our civilization evolves, someone will need to identify the important differences soon. In the meantime, I'll identify the highest classification now, which describes any individual whose normal method of reasoning is perfect application of the genius formula. I'll call such a person a megagenius, defined as follows. Definition number 1. A person of extremely superior intelligence whose natural analytic process of reasoning is perfect application of the genius formula. Definition number 2. One who innately reasons by perfect application of the genius formula and whose level of intelligence is so distinctly separate from and superior to that which denotes a genius as to not be accurately measurable by the most advanced procedures of intelligence testing. After many years of research, I can tell you with complete confidence that the difference in intelligence between a genius and a megagenius is greater than 15 times the difference between a person of average intelligence and a genius. If that surprises you, it's because our vision is always better looking toward the bottom of the intelligence scale than toward the top. Incidentally, whoever concluded that the average person uses only 10% of his potential mental ability certainly was not using 10% of his. One would have to understand the limits of potential mental ability first, which he clearly did not. I've looked into this area, and a more accurate estimation is that the average person uses less than 1%. Factually, if your intelligence is measurable, it is not particularly high, at least not in comparison to your potential. Incidentally, congratulations for deciding to do something effective about it by listening to these Mega Genius lectures. Some years ago, a select group of faculty members from Stanford University and the University of California conducted an in-depth study to determine the IQs of some of the most eminent men and women who lived between about 1450 and 1850. From a wealth of personal information about the subjects and some 40 pages of detailed formulas, they assigned IQs as though the individuals had actually taken an IQ test. The findings, published in Genetic Studies of Genius by Catherine Morris Cox, Ph.D., included the following. Incidentally, remember, there is a world of difference between having a genius in a particular area and being one. Nicholas Copernicus, Polish founder of modern astronomy, 105. Michael Faraday, English chemist and physicist, 105. Ulysses Simpson Grant, U.S. President, 110. Rembrandt van Rijn, Dutch painter and etcher, 110. Martin Luther, German religious reformer, 115. Franz Joseph Haydn, Austrian composer, 120. Johann Sebastian Bach, German composer and musician, 125. Abraham Lincoln, U.S. President, 125. George Washington, U.S. President, 125. Sir Isaac Newton, English mathematician and philosopher, 130. Benedict de Spinoza, Dutch philosopher, 130. Ludwig van Beethoven, German composer, 135. Charles Robert Darwin, English naturalist, 135. Leonardo da Vinci, Italian painter, scientist, and engineer, 135. Peter Paul Rubens, Flemish painter, 140. Francis Bacon, English philosopher and statesman, 145. Benjamin Franklin, American statesman and scientist, 145. Galileo Galilei, Italian physicist and astronomer, 145. Thomas Jefferson, U.S. President, 145. In the past, mega geniuses such as I, whose accurate IQs are higher still, and whose levels of intelligence are too high to be accurately measurable by even our most modern techniques, have been about as rare as visits to Earth by Halley's Comet. Nevertheless, as man develops a better understanding of intelligence and its importance, and refines and advances effective techniques to increase the intelligence of all individuals, megageniuses will appear more frequently. Now you may wonder to what extent these megagenius lectures are derived from a perfect application of the genius formula. Well, everything of any importance that I tell you in these megagenius lectures I could have told you more than 30 years ago. This wisdom was true then, and it is true today, and it will be just as true 1,000 years from today. Wisdom is knowledge worth knowing, and is based on truth, which is a static. It neither changes nor ceases to exist. These megagenius lectures include a few opinions, which are clearly expressed as such to avoid confusion between opinions and facts. They are few, because I doubt that you would find my opinions more interesting than I, and I consider them insignificant. In addition, it contains examples and stories for clarification and amusement. Otherwise, the entire megagenius lectures are based on a perfect application of the genius formula. They do not, however, reflect all that a perfect application of the Genius formula reveals. Far from it. Rather, I am expressing 1. How to think like a genius, 2. More truth than you have seen previously about many subjects, and 3. The amount of truth that most individuals of at least average intelligence will understand with minimal difficulty. If you could suddenly review, in proper order, all the truths a perfect application of the Genius formula reveals about everything, you would discover that in the final analysis they perfectly support all of your most basic convictions, although many of the truths would stagger you by their expanse and simplicity. Taken out of order, they would be an extremely disagreeable mess, and anyone would be one confused entity. My intention is to indicate some of those truths in close to the proper order and cause alarm only occasionally. One of the problems with education is that the importance of individual facts is often unclear. Let's take your backyard, for example. It might be of minor importance to know that English sparrows land in it, that bumblebees fly over it, and that toads hop upon it. It might be of greater importance to know that there is a lien upon it, and that a major earthquake fault runs through it. Still, those would probably pale in comparison to the knowledge that there are 100 bars of pure gold buried beneath it. Because these lectures are the product of perfect application of the Genius formula, you should consider that most of the information is of particular importance to you, your happiness, and your life, despite the fact that, with the exception of a few mega-truths, it is all quite elementary in the grand scope of things. To help you think like a genius, you should give extra thought to the mega-truths. I'll be giving you dozens of them in the lectures that follow. Straight out of a perfect application of the Genius formula, each is a golden nugget of wisdom. Think of them as the road signs of life. You will soon realize they guide you in a direction of increased survival, happiness, understanding, and even unlimited truth. Let's briefly recap some mega-truths covered thus far. Our first mega-truth was, all things are as simple as they are understood. Not long ago, just half a millennium or so, this physical world was understood to be an extremely involved place. No one was sure of its dimensions. Some people lived in some areas and others lived in other areas, some near and some far. People's bodies were sometimes different colors, and cultures practiced different rituals and subscribed to traditions that seemed radical. There was much speculation about what existed far beyond distant horizons. Authorities of the day taught that deep oceans were inhabited by fearsome sea monsters lurking for foolish and unwary human prey, and everyone knew that if you sailed too far from home, you would fall off the edge of the earth into a great dark oblivion. Yet if any person alive in those times could have glanced at Earth from a space station, all the mystery, speculation, and complexity would have vanished immediately. The entire Earth would have been revealed as a simple ball. Understanding would have replaced pervasive complexity. Just like the Earth, all things are as simple as they are understood. Another mega-truth was, intelligence is the ability to differentiate. If someone doesn't understand mechanics or electronics or fine dining, then he probably doesn't know the difference between a Phillips head and a Reed and Prince, or a rheostat and a micro switch, or a caramel flan and a creme brulee. You see, a person doesn't understand subjects in which he doesn't differentiate well. He is not acting intelligently on those matters. A primary reason a person cannot easily understand a subject is that he does not understand basic definitions for that subject, and he refuses to look them up in a dictionary. As soon as you get him to straighten out some basic definitions and differentiate between them, suddenly he brightens up and begins to learn. He discovers that a Phillips head is a screwdriver with a crisscross edge at the tip to fit a screw with a cross instead of a screw with a straight slot in the head, and that a Reed and Prince screwdriver is just like a Phillips head screwdriver but with a sharp point at the tip. He discovers that a rheostat is something that changes resistance so electricity can flow through it more or less easily, such as a dimmer switch, and that a microswitch is just a small electrical switch. He discovers that a caramel flan is a baked custard made with eggs, milk, and sugar, with a liquid caramelized sugar topping, and a creme brulee is similar, but made with more yolks and with cream, and then caramelized on top with a torch or under a broiler. By differentiating, he is becoming slightly more intelligent on those subjects, and his understanding increases. He even begins to like the subjects better. Intelligence is the ability to differentiate. Another mega-truth was, intelligence is easily teachable if taught intelligently. First, you teach a person that intelligence is the ability to distinguish differences and lack of differences. Then you teach him to examine, by any means he can find, such as looking, touching, ferreting out definitions, etc. Then you teach him to stand way back and view from considerable distances, so he sees not just the closest trees, but the entire forest. Then you teach him to assume nothing, so as not to alloy what is actually there with his prejudices or other false and unsubstantiated preconceived beliefs. Accordingly, he perceives what actually is, begins to distinguish differences, and his understanding increases. Intelligence is easily teachable, if taught intelligently. Another mega-truth was, unhappiness is not an intelligent state of existence. Anything you truly understand you are happy about, and anything you are not happy about you do not truly understand. One cannot be unhappy about something, or life in general, and simultaneously understand it fully. This is not an easy concept for a man to comprehend, only because there are so many things that he frequently fails to understand that he has come to mistakenly believe that life is innately a series of bouts of unhappiness. It is difficult for him to admit that his unhappiness is always his responsibility. It is always he who has failed to understand. It takes extremely little intelligence to fail to understand, and to therefore be unhappy. Conversely, it takes considerable intelligence to consistently understand and consistently be happy. Unhappiness is not an intelligent state of existence. Another mega-truth was, the genius formula is the most basic and effective process to isolate and identify truth. It is the most basic and effective process because it directs a person to use all the techniques that are necessary and no techniques that are unnecessary to perceive what actually is and, therefore, distinguish difference and lack of difference. Because of its simplicity, it is rather brutal in that it directs a person to utterly disregard everything that he has been taught or has conveniently concluded that is not in exact alignment with what he is actually perceiving at that moment. In doing so, it directly addresses man's great weakness, his inability to question the myriad of false teachings and beliefs he holds dear to his heart. A 21st century saber of wisdom, the genius formula is the most basic and effective process to isolate and identify truth. Another mega-truth was, perception is senior to and governs intelligence. Perception is any and all means by which one becomes aware. It includes, but is not limited to, the commonly recognized senses of sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell. There are many other unrecognized senses of which a person is capable. Perception also includes intuition. Through perception, one communicates with persons, locations, energy, objects, spaces, and the like, which results in his distinguishing differences and lack of differences, and, accordingly, constitutes higher intelligence. In applying the genius formula, you might say that one perceives in considerable detail, perceives in considerable scope, and does not imagine or believe that he sees something that does not actually exist in that location at that time. Perception is senior to and governs intelligence. In the next lecture, I'll give you some more mega truths.